Last night really was an important night for Elizabeth Warren. She was given the other plum speaking slot that was right before Bill Clinton, and it gave her a badly needed chance for a boost in her Massachusetts Senate race against Scott Brown.
The system is rigged. Look around. Oil companies guzzle down billions in profits. Billionaires pay lower tax rates than their secretaries. And Wall Street CEOs, the same ones who wrecked our economy and destroyed millions of jobs, still strut around Congress, no shame, demanding favors and acting like we should thank them. Does anyone here have a problem with that? Yeah, well, I do too. I do too.
So, guys, I thought it was a strong speech, but I have to say, Elizabeth Warren has a problem here. She's fallen several points behind, I think about 5 or 6 points behind Scott Brown in this race. And I think there's a frustration and a concern among Democrats in Massachusetts and nationally that the Elizabeth Warren that Ed introduced to last year, if you remember, there was that viral video where she had this sort of impromptu explanation of the social contract. It was really kind of compelling. It was charismatic. It was digestible. I think Democrats looked at that last fall and they said, this really is the perfect messenger for what we're trying to say about the economy. I don't think that same Elizabeth Warren is who and what people in Massachusetts have been seeing since then, and I think it's part of the reason she's fallen behind. I looked at that speech last night, and I guess I would have said serviceable was the word that came to mind, but I think there was a real basic problem here. This was 10 o'clock last night. Look what else is on television. There was the NFL opener, and in Boston, in Massachusetts, there was a Red Sox game on the West Coast. And why is that significant? Well, I think one of the reasons she's behind is because there's sort of working class and middle class voters in Massachusetts who Scott Brown has forged an emotional and cultural connection with. And he's really used sports to do this. He has aired ads in which he just talks about the Red Sox. He just talks about Fenway Park. He just talks about the Celtics. And it's voters in places, I grew up here. I know a lot of these people, Fitchburg, Lowell, Quincy, places like this in Massachusetts. They traditionally vote Democratic, but they really identify with Scott Brown, and they're the ones that Elizabeth Warren has to reach. She's not going to win the popularity contest. She needs to reach them with an economic message that just basically says, hey, the Democrats are more in your interest than the Republican Party. And I think she gave a decent speech last night, but I don't know how many people were watching.
Yeah, Steve, I got to agree. I also grew up around there, and I feel like her pitch last night was incredibly professorial. I mean, making this complicated argument that Mitt Romney is a plutocrat, I'm sure killed in a coffee house in Cambridge, but outside of Harvard Square, to the working class voter in Massachusetts or frankly anywhere, I don't think it was a very effective message. It was not delivered effectively. I don't think she did herself any favors last night.
I got to agree with you. As we all know, 3 of us are from Massachusetts. I see Scott Brown represented in so many of the people I know from Massachusetts. And I see Elizabeth Warren, so many of the people I know over at Harvard. I like her. I think she's the sort of person who we should have in D.C. That said, I think Scott Brown is also the sort of person we should have in D.C. It saddened me a little bit that she's not a great campaigner and that the process doesn't reveal character, but it weeds out good people. I wish that were different, but that's the way it is.
I am not from Massachusetts, but, I think ultimately the only speech that really mattered last night was Bill Clinton's speech. I actually found her, as he called her, professorial. I can see where you're coming from with that. I found her more earnest and likable than that. But I would also say, I think it's harder for a woman to pull off being the intellectual. I think people have a tendency rather to look at a person who presents herself in the way that Elizabeth Warren does, and rather than see her as smart or commanding or above the fray, all the ways that we saw President Obama when he was introduced to the country, there's a tendency instead to call her cold and distant. And I was trying to think of a female senator who I could sort of see Elizabeth Warren sharing a similar model with, and I was having trouble coming up with one. So I would just say I think there is a little bit of a gender issue there in the way that she's being perceived.
Chris, by the way, there's a specific gender issue, too. I think Massachusetts has a really abysmal track record when it comes to electing women candidates. Shannon O'Brien, Martha Coakley, Evelyn Murphy. So I think Elizabeth Warren's probably running against that, too.